Check, check. 1, 2, 1, 2. Testing. This is a test for YouTube. 1, 2, 3, 4. Testing. 1, 2, 3, 4. One, two, three, four. Check, check, check. Check. 1, 2, 3, 4. Check, check. Check. 1, 2, 2, 2. Check, check. 1, 2, 2, 3, 4. Test. 1, 2, 2.
Good evening, everyone. Welcome and thank you for coming out. We're going to start our walkthrough momentarily. So I just, if folks can gravitate over towards the entrance to the gym, we're going to start there. And Mr. Johnson and I are going to take folks around and give you a little tour of the building.
Check, check, check. Turn the other one on.
Yep, no problem. So who else is here? Will? Give me just a minute. If the flow is coming in, I'll wait.
Then I missed the start of the tour.
Will is here tonight too, right?
Yeah, so.
The three of you? No, I'm not going to point you out, given
Oh, yeah,
the
yeah.
10.
No, I think
Just curious.
I think all of us are we? Oh, Dara's here too.
That's right.
Dara,
I know I
Will,
saw somebody.
and me, you and me.
Okay.
Natalie's not.
Chris is stuck. Good evening, everyone. We're going to go ahead and get started with the informational portion of the session. Thank you so much for everyone who came and took the time to go through the tour. We appreciate the opportunity to kind of pull the curtain back and give you a little bit of a sense of what goes on inside the schools. I do have to give two shout outs of thanks. Number one, please join me and give a hand of applause for Mr. Johnson for being here, taking us on this tour with his genuine honesty, for coming in on a snow day when he didn't have to. So thank you, Mr. Johnson, for that. I also want to thank, too, the folks that are with us tonight to make this happen. We have Chris Maselli, who's running AV. He's with the district. John Condon, our director of facilities, who's here as well. Francisco, our custodian, who stepped in tonight since we were closed. And I just want to thank them because the work that is done here every day is it's all for our kids. We do as Mr. Johnson eloquently said, we do the best every day for our kids with what we have. We're never going to complain. I talked to one parent, I can't remember who it was, that said they didn't even, I don't remember who it was. They said their kids went to school here for years. They didn't even give it a thought to the facility because when they came, they fell in love with the school because of the education their child was getting and the great teachers. That will always be the heartbeat of who Siwanoy is. At the same time, it's a chance for us to do something to improve that learning environment for all students. So thank you for taking the time to do that tonight with us.
One thing I think people missed if they didn't come here right when we started the tour is that this is the gym, the cafeteria, the auditorium.
Thank you.
And everything else. So I think
Thank
that's
you very
a very
much.
important part.
Yeah, so that we'll put the ending on this the tour to say where you're sitting now serves so many different purposes. You can see the net that's hanging over on the wall there. Every day that gets pulled across, and 2 grade levels full of students sit on that side of the curtain while there's intramurals going on this side of the curtain. Lunch is served over there against the wall. It's a well-oiled machine, but it is loud and it is tight. So this is, again, it serves the all-purpose space. It's where there's concerts. It's where there's meetings for parents. It's where there's town halls, a school play, enrichment, you name it. It all has to happen here and all has to be coordinated around one another. So this is just another way that space impacts our school program. Yes?
Yeah, I wonder a few years ago, remember, I was under.
Come up to a mic.
Yeah, I'll give you a mic. Yep. Real quick, we'll let you speak.
Hi, so the intramurals are for 4th and 5th graders, for those people who don't know. So when I was in kindergarten through 3rd grade, my favorite part of lunch was sitting on this side of the net and watching. So you definitely feel like you're a part of the upper grades. I think having a lot of things going on in this room was never a problem. I don't remember a single time in my entire time at Siwanoy where anyone ever said anything about that being a problem. Maybe people made jokes about the fact that this room had a lot of things going on, but I think that's part of what makes this school so special is there is a lot going on in this room, and I don't think it's ever really caused any concern. Yeah, only benefits. So.
Thank you for that. And that's the benefit of having sessions like this is there's different perspectives to bring to light.
Yeah, just to that, the kids do love it. Like they're over there, they're cheering and everything. But when you think about the program, we can't schedule other specials until this is cleaned up after lunch, which is not until 1:30, which takes away an hour of instruction because PE is one of our specials. So if we had another space where we're not utilizing eating space with play space, like in terms of, well, not play space, instructional space, we could schedule around 1 o'clock and have staggered lunches and things of that nature, which makes the programming much, much better for our students.
Thank you so much. With that, I'd like to dive into the presentation. We had set aside until about 8:30 tonight, so we're a little bit behind, but we're going to plow through it quickly because we do want to allow time for more questions and comments at the end. I did also want to note that we have a large portion of our Board of Education here tonight. These engagement events are meant for exactly that, for us to share information, for you to get eyes on what's going on around within the school in particular, but also to understand overall projects that are being considered, and then for the board to hear feedback from the greater community. So we had a small group here last week. We've got a much larger group here tonight. Thank you for that. And we're going to dive in to the presentation so we can leave some time for questions. So just by way, if you're just coming to this conversation, important to know that the Board of Education has been looking at facilities for at least the past 2 school years now. Last year, the board has set one of their goals to look at finance and facilities to get a good grounding in that work because it's a relatively young board. A lot of new folks had come to the board in the last several years. That positioned them perfectly then for this year to as we were getting the results of our building conditions survey, which is something that's generally done every 5 years. The state changed its cycle, so we are actually 9 years from having done that again, and going forward it'll be every year, every 5 years after that. That gives us a roadmap of what are the potential needs for our facilities that need to be considered. Additionally, they did an updated demographic study and room utilization study to get at kind of what a lot of us were just talking about. How full are our classrooms? How often are they used? And what is the impact on programming, building use, wear and tear, staffing, schedules, all of those things, operational things that we think about that you probably never even see or give one thought to. And that's the way it should be, because it should be seamless from your perspective. But those are all things that do impact the functioning of any school. It identified specifically infrastructure concerns, and again, our custodians do an amazing job with what they have. They keep everything beautiful and clean, but our buildings are old, especially the 4 that are about 100 years old, this one included. They were not designed for the current instructional program. So they were designed with classrooms for students, and we can have lots of debates about how many students we should put in those rooms and how many were and how many are, but they were designed as full class rooms. What they was not designed in this building, and you saw it in some of the closets and some of the spaces where people are doing their work, was a lot of small group instruction space. So we have psychologists and speech teachers in what used to be closets. We've got people making use of every square foot of the building in order to provide services to students that were not offered 100 years ago, but are very common for us. Special education services, intervention services, counseling services, et cetera. So there's spaces that we're not designed for, but that we provide and that we could do better for our students. As we've talked a lot throughout the tour, our current space is very, very tight. There's a lot of students in those rooms, and we're using every room in the building. So there's no flexibility left right now for fluctuations in size or for additional class sizes as enrollments may change over the years. A couple other things, and we'll circle back to these throughout the presentation as well. In looking at the facilities, the board also looked at our finances deeply and saw what is the short and the long-term forecast for that, and how do we make sure that there's sustainability, and did identify in that some potential drops in debt payments. It's the middle school being paid off, and I think the Colonial renovation project for many years being paid off, that are coming up in the next few years, which give us the opportunity to use that debt service now for new borrowing in a way that would not raise the taxes for a portion of these projects. So that we would be debt neutral borrowing. We'll talk about that shortly. As I said, key findings, the schools are all well maintained, but the 8 issues identified were related to age. So there are lots of repairs and upgrades recommended specifically for our heating systems, exterior masonry roofs and windows, so the building envelope, everything that envelops the building, the roof, the windows, the masonry, the waterproofing, upgrades to be done in those areas. Also, I don't think it's a secret to the folks who have been in the school here, this is our last school that has yet to be made ADA compliant, so that's something that is a priority to the board. We're going to be talking about that on a later slide as well. As we talked about, lack of separate cafeteria space. And that's at 3 of our elementary schools as well as the high school. We have one high school that's shared between the middle school and high school campus. Middle school students eat there every day, periods 4, 5, and 6. There's maybe 50 seats left for the entire high school in those periods. So creative scheduling, we've solved some of that for our 9th graders, but there's no dedicated cafeteria space there. And additionally, as you all know, here at Siwanoy, these schools built 100 years ago, the students went home for lunch. You didn't need a cafeteria. They don't do that anymore. So they're here for lunch in the same space where they have physical education every day in addition to all those things. So separate cafeterias would make some significant changes for the way that our buildings can function. Also, especially post-pandemic, we think about air quality and what's the quality of the learning environment itself, the healthiness of the learning environment itself. So it was recommended that we take a look at potential upgrades to air conditioning, and with the weather getting warmer on both ends of the school year, it's becoming more of a concern. And then also we've been asked to look at sustainable options for heating and cooling, as well as the grounds and the schools as a whole. Just a couple of pictures of our current infrastructure issues. There's tons of photos. We're going to be uploading more to the websites as days go by, so you can get a sense. On the left, you've got a major crack that's on the high school building. You can see that about the middle of that top picture. It kind of trails down from there. In the middle is the roofs of the middle school that are at end of life. So those are original to the building and needing to be replaced. And on the right is that is the worst boiler in the district. I will admit that. It doesn't work anymore. It's one of the ones at the high school. So we're functioning on fewer boilers there than the building was designed for. And all of our boilers district-wide are the same vintage. So we're really looking to need to make some replacements so we don't have systems failures similar to what we saw at the middle school back in December. Different reason, but different HVAC system, but same reason. It was an end-of-life system that had a critical failure that resulted in a loss of school, which is not something we want to repeat. So when we look at enrollment and capacity, we are projected to grow. When I came to the district 8 years ago, we were at just about 3,000 students. We've dropped down in that time to about 2,800, but the projections show that we're heading back. Most of the schools, as we've talked about, are operating at optimal or above functional capacity. At the middle school and high school, what that looks like is classrooms are used every period or almost every single period, which you might think, well, they're rooms, they're supposed to be used every period, but they're really not. The more you use a room at a secondary level, the more that constrains where and when you can schedule classes. So for a high school like ours with a lot of high achieving students with very specialized interests and lots of offerings for courses, you want to put those where students can best get them. We're in a position of having to put them when a room is open, separate from when the student is actually able to get it in their schedule, which presents a lot of issues. Additionally, we've got a lot of teachers changing classrooms, sharing classrooms. They can't really own the classroom. They're carrying materials. They're set up every time, and every time they move and change periods, they're losing time setting up, prepping, and really being ready for that class. They're walking in with the class. So those little things over time add up, and we know that if we had more space, we could do a better job. We already talked about small group instruction. With the small group instruction, us as well as I think every district in the state, in the region, in the country has seen increases in special education services, especially following the pandemic. We want to be very intentional about building spaces for the students who need special education services and who are in most need. So again, our buildings don't have, many of them don't have those spaces intentionally designed, but we want to be sure that we do right by those students and provide the best space we can. One final note with the building that we're in is Siwanoy, and looking district-wide at our buildings, Siwanoy has the lowest square footage per student of any building in the district. I think it's important to note as you're sitting in it and having been in those classrooms to understand comparability between the other buildings. Just a quick note on the enrollments. As I mentioned before, the full report's on the website. I know you can't read this, so that's why I'd say feel free to look it up so you can read for yourself. Our current elementary enrollment across the 4 schools is 1,284. It's projected to go up almost 100 overall in the next couple of years. By 2019, that's 4 years' time. So what we're talking about tonight for projects is probably not going to be in place by then. So we're going to have to manage and make do with some of those growing numbers until we peak and start to drop back down. Those large numbers, though, will eventually go on to secondary. So middle school is projected to go from the current 765 to 784. Not as bad. That's only about a 20 student increase, which can be managed often with scheduling, and it spreads out a little differently when you're in one bigger building. At the high school, though, we're looking to go up almost 100 from current 878 to 959. So we've got more time, though, because that won't be until the 2030 to 2033 time period. So in coming to this work, the board and the district really just put a lot of priorities before us. How do we develop long-term sustainable capital improvement plans and the funding to go with them? How do we prioritize projects? Because we can't do it all. We want to make sure that what we're doing is going to impact, maintain the high quality educational program, but also have high leverage for improving the health and safety of learning environments for our students and staff, and certainly invest properly in our community assets. They've been here for generations. We want to make sure they remain for generations and do the right work. We also want to identify, as I said earlier, consider some environmentally more friendly systems and processes to continue to improve, invest in the future, and to do that all in a way that hopefully aligns with our debt service drops to help mitigate the tax impact. It's not going to completely cover it, but to help mitigate that because we recognize that impact on our taxpayers. So just so you understand a little bit about the project process. In planning process, as I said, we started last school year talking about facilities and finance deeply. That positioned us to start what we call bond feasibility. In addition to last year's goals and work around that, the district, the board, and a broad stakeholder group met and designed the new strategic plan for the next 5 years. As part of that work, out of surveys, out of focus groups, out of discussion, surfaced one of the 3 key priorities around facilities and sustainable learning environments. Also with that, the other 2 priorities were belonging and wellness, which is a really important value, and then, of course, academic achievement and personal growth. All very important things and all things that we have in mind as we come to this work. So then this fall, we officially started the bond feasibility process where our architects came and presented the building conditions survey with those identified and prioritized needs, put that together with our demographic and room utilization studies to give us a really clear picture of where our needs are across the district. Additionally, in October, we had our capital markets financial advisors come and talk to us about our debt service long-term forecast, what opportunities might be there, and what that may mean in terms of borrowing, which we'll talk about later. Right now, actually, as the next step in that, we then ask the architects to come back with, okay, these are our problems. What are some solutions? Come back to us. If Siwanoy's got a comprehensive set of issues that need to be dealt with, middle school, high school have a comprehensive set of needs, come back to us with some ideas that are good enough to criticize, and then we'll start the process. And right now, we are in that yellow process. This is the feedback and refinement process. So there's a starting points. There are ideas that we brought out now to the community. I will say if you were at last week's session and anything else this week, they have not been updated, so please do not take that as a sign that we're not listening. Take that as a sign of we haven't had a chance to update and incorporate the feedback. Okay, so that's our caveat for tonight. We know that there's already been issues raised on some of those that we will be attending to. The other thing is not all ideas can be incorporated because you're going to hear even probably the course of tonight competing ideas of what should be there and what should not be there. We can't do it all, but we're going to listen for themes, for patterns, for those things that fit our strategic plan, our values and our ideals as a district, and that are consistent and that we're hearing across the feedback that we're receiving. One other thing to watch for at the end of this week, which is tomorrow, we're going to be launching a survey to the community. So please take the time to take that survey because that will also give us broader quantitative feedback to then bring all this qualitative going to the board by their presence here listening, and all the quantitative will also be looked at so we can get a really broad snapshot of feedback. So through the next couple of months, this month, March, the board is listening, diving deeply into that. And by the end of March is what we're aiming for, and the timeline may change. But as of right now, we're hoping by the end of the March, the board is looking to make some decisions about what will be ultimately included in the bond scope, what would be presented to the community to vote on. So they would decide which option are we moving forward, which projects are being included, how big of are we doing all of the infrastructure, are we doing part of it, are we doing all of air conditioning, part of it. They'll make those initial decisions based on what they think is best for the district in light of the feedback and the needs, and then that would go to the voters in May. And that's where the voters would decide ultimately on the up to amount of what we would be authorized to spend for the specific projects that had been identified and included and put to the voters. That would potentially happen in May, and then the work begins, most likely time frame between voter approval, design, state education department approval, and then start a bidding Work would begin at the earliest on any projects July 2026. Projects would be staged out over time. We just brought on a construction manager to help with cost estimating, cross-checking the budgets that you're going to see. So somebody to be an independent look at those costs to make sure that we're getting the costs right and that we're able to build a budget that will help us to deliver to you what it is that we're putting forward. They will also help us then with staging out the projects from a coordination and logistics perspective, as well as thinking about how do we, again, back into some of those debt drops to help mitigate the tax impact over time for the community. So just some dates that we've already met this fall. We're not going to spend any time there. Just want to dive into the heating systems, HVAC systems that we've talked about. So our current systems in the 4 older buildings are steam heat. They are end of life. That boiler that you saw is representative of them. So minimally, we need to upgrade the heating system. To replace the heating systems, we can replace in kind, or we can upgrade, which would be much more efficient and would pair better with other systems, which will be more important as we go through the rest of the project. With that, we would be looking to replace the pipes that go with those systems because they're basically original. The building's 100 years old. So you don't want to put a new system on old pipes. We also identified areas where water intrusion around the district. So Prospect Hill's roof is original, 100 years old approximately. It served a wonderful life, so it's time to look at replacing that. There's additional select roof repairs at the middle school and Colonial that would need to be looked at, and then masonry and window repairs across the building in those older buildings for water intrusion, energy efficiency, clarity, et cetera. This is very hard to see, and I apologize. Again, this presentation is on our bond website as well, so you can look it up and look more closely. But if you look across the top row, and you've got the different categories: roofing, windows, masonry, heat plant replacements, which is replacing in kind, heat upgrade to hydronic heat, which is what's recommended. That's shifting to hot water heat. It's more controllable and more energy efficient, and it pairs better with the upcoming systems that we're going to talk about. So those are your columns, and then if you look across the rows, Colonial is the top. The infrastructure that we're looking at for Colonial would total just over $7 million. Siwanoy is next. That would be $8 million, and that's based on the current building, the current facility. Prospect Hill would be a little bit higher, especially because of the roof, and it's a bigger footprint, so that's $11.7 million. Middle school, Hutchinson, nothing. That's the one we could take off the table. That's why we made that decision a few years ago. Middle school, between roofing and some masonry work, $2.745 million. And then the high school, biggest footprint, biggest building, one of our oldest schools. So that overall is significant. It's $24.5 million if you were to do everything that's been identified there. So that's part of the work that we're doing, is digging deep to prioritize what will be done. So it's going specifically to Siwanoy. We've walked the building. You've seen firsthand a lot of the challenges. The school was opened in 1910, so as I said, not designed for the current 21st century, 2025 instructional approach and program. We talked about insufficient rooms for current and future enrollment, so that's small classes as well as not enough classes, lack of small group instruction. You saw the kindergarten rooms, and as I said, lowest square footage in the district. The other issue is accessibility, and I have to say a point here, and this is something that, as we've listened to feedback and talked with the board and really gotten clear on our priorities, I have to say from the district perspective and from the board, this is a non-negotiable in our perspective, period, end of story. There's legal reasons, there's building code reasons, there's moral reasons, there's ethical reasons. If we are a district that values belonging and values wellness and values sustainable learning environments and facilities, it's a non-negotiable. So I want to put that out there now because it's not even a conversation we're going to debate. There will be nothing done that will not consider doing that in this building. So just needed to say that with clarity. And all the reasons really there explain why. One of the things about this building that makes that more challenging, and is probably part of why it was not done, is the layout of the building. We walked 7 levels, 28 steps to the front door, and then we didn't count the internal steps. I didn't anyways. But because of that split level layout, it's very difficult to put elevators in, and to do that, you would lose 2 classrooms on each floor, or a portion of them, which when we were already short on classrooms and we're already short on full-size classrooms, you're now reducing 4 spaces down to smaller spaces. So those can be repurposed for small group instruction, but we would need to then replace those 4 classrooms, and what you'll see is a couple of options looking at an expansion minimally to replace those classrooms. But the board didn't want to stop there and only do that because there are so many issues. They wanted to take the time to invest and do this comprehensively. So we'll show you the options that are being looked at there. So at all of the options that we looked at, there was a range from A, I think we got up to a D. Yes, we did get up to a D. A being only doing the ADA work and basically nothing else. D being building a new school. We had to go there because we went there last time when we had these conversations, and over time the district's taken time to focus on the middle school 20 years ago, then Colonial was focused on next, then Hutchinson was focused on next. It's Siwanoy's turn. So in looking at that, how do we solve for as many problems as possible? And part of that, we had to ask the question about a new school. So because this property is so limited, we don't have the option to do what we did at Hutchinson. We can't build on one side while we keep school in session on the other side. We would have to completely remove students from the property, demo the building, and then build a new one. So in order to do that, we did ask for costs. Walter Hauser is here from KG&D tonight as our architect to help with technical questions. And we asked them to look at that, and basically what it would mean is establishing a mobile school on Ingalls Field is probably the most logical place because you've got cafeterias and gymnasium space there. You've got a big field with green space for the kids to be able to run and still play. But the setup of that and the mobiles themselves, which would have to be there for probably 2 to 3 years, was about $15 million just for that. And then with escalation costs based on just taking the cost of Hutchinson and playing that forward with current escalation, all in, that was about a $90 million proposition. And the cost, the disruption, the historic nature of this building, all those really made that a non-starter. So that came off the table pretty quickly. So we're down to some kind of a range of B and C options, which we'll look at. Any of the ones that we're looking at would address the ADA issues, would give us a net gain in classrooms, would provide renovation to the existing building, would preserve as much of the outdoor space as possible. And yes, there will be loss. When you're going to add square footage for an extension, naturally there will be a loss. But one of the things that we've done is for 2 purposes, really, is we've asked KG&D to bring on a landscape architect with a sustainability focus. So they can, A, look to how do we redesign the space to keep as much as possible for our students, maybe reconfigure, but still have the same elements and qualities to the outside. But then also, how do we do it in a sustainable way? And I'm looking at Ann because we've had many conversations about this. They haven't fallen on deaf ears, they just take a while. But if we're gonna do it, let's do it right. You know, we've already reached out to the Manor to say, how can we partner on anything that is around this campus that we can help work together to help resolve some of your stormwater issues. There's pipes that run under this property that are part of their project. So those partnerships are happening because we want to do it and do it right and solve for as much as possible here and think really far into the future. So renovations, preserving the outdoor classroom and microforest that have had a lot of personal investment from the parents and families in this neighborhood and this school. As I already talked about, stormwater, and then incorporate as much of the feedback as possible. So here's the first option. The yellow is the footprint of the current school. The outdoor, we tried to kind of add some reconfigurations. Nothing that you're going to see tonight is set in stone. That's why we're here. This is an iterative process. These are the good enough to criticize plans. Every time we meet, Walter takes notes, and then next time he comes back to the board with new renderings, it's going to be reflective of what we're hearing in these sessions. So idea there is the main building stays the same, reconfigure some of the outer space with some similar and or additional elements to them, and then in blue is a potential for an expansion. It would be a 2-story expansion. It does preserve all of the existing building. It does tie in on that one corner, which is where a new elevator would go and would be the start of the corridor out to the new wing. And it includes 3 grade level classes on each floor of the new wing, as well as a new cafeteria for a net gain of 2 classrooms. Remember, I said we would lose 4 to do the elevators, so this expansion would have 6 classrooms to give us the net gain of 2. Hard to see, sorry about the coloring there, but in essence, anything in purple would be renovated, so the whole building would be renovated throughout. The blue is the new expansion on the right. These are some thoughts to have 3 kindergarten classrooms there, full size, not 2/3 size, full size on the ground floor. So they could, on the back side, maybe go right out to a kindergarten playground, similar to what we have at Hutchinson. They'd be right across from the cafeteria, and the cafeteria would be across the hall, so all the students could eat lunch there, and they would exit straight from the cafeteria onto the playground there. So trying to think about the flow of how to make best use of that space. That would be the ground floor, and there would be an accessible entrance out there as well. And then the floor above that, similar thing, the gymnasium would stay the same on the right, that's the gray block, and then renovations in the rest of the building, just like the floor below it. On the upper floor here, our thought was maybe put the 5th grade classrooms, biggest kids in the biggest rooms, and maybe add some small group instruction spaces tied into those. The question did come up, can we build above the cafeteria? Because in this rendering it's not showing any building above it. The answer to that question is yes. So we just need to think about that. That would obviously add a little bit to scope and cost, but that could be done if that was, I know Mr. Dolgan cornered me yesterday and said it would make a great music room up there. It could also make some classrooms as well. So, but yeah, there's opportunities there. So that little kind of, the gray line there is the roof of the cafeteria. You saw the cafeteria itself on that level, and then right above it, currently it's just the roof, but that could be considered for additional building, or for maybe reconfiguring the extension to still get the same number of classrooms, but maybe in a different profile extension. Okay. We went to the basement. This is a B alternate, different version of it. Basically everything is the same with the exception of no cafeteria. So that is an option. Going on to option C, and this is a much bigger endeavor, bigger change. So the yellow is still the core, the main core of the building, but this design does consider taking the wings off and reconfiguring and creating a whole new larger extension on the right. The gain on the left side would be a lot more green space, would be gained back by the removal of that wing. And then on this side would be the building, which we'll take a look at here. You can read that for yourself. The net gain of this one is 4 classrooms over the current classroom size. So, and again, all these things can be adjusted. So this is what it could look like inside. Purple is the old, blue is the new. On the bottom, just in the middle of it, you see kind of a lighter blue. That would be a new main entrance that would be accessible. And then across from that, if you just keep going up, would be the new main office. And then you could reconfigure how space is used on the left. On the right, the big block on the bottom corner would be a new library. And then going up the corridor, you'd have classrooms on either side. On the left, you get to a cafeteria across from, again, kindergarten classrooms. And on the top could be a new gymnasium there. That one in the drawing is about half the size of the Hutchinson gym, just for a reference point. On the second floor, it looked very similar, renovations of the older building, and then classroom space above on the new. One thing we did ask them to build in, and it was in option B, and it is also in option C. If your children went here, you probably know we have one of our special education programs here, Ms. Pappas's class. It's an 812, meaning it can be up to 8 students with 1 teacher and 2 aides, very high needs students in our special education program. The first few years of those programs, the students and their families go to Colonial, and then after a few years, they transition here for the upper grades. So they're there for like K through 2, and then they come here for grades 3 through 5. What we would love to do is use this as an opportunity to create a space where those families do not have to transition anymore. They could come here in kindergarten, and they can be a part of Siwinite all the way through their 5 years to build on that belonging and connection. And we have the opportunity to build space, especially with them in mind, and design the OT space, the PT space, the classroom space, et cetera. So in there is 2 classrooms for the 812 program, and that was also in B. I just neglected to point it out. Okay. Both of these, I would say, also add a bunch of bathrooms. Any of you who did stop to see the single bathroom, you kind of get it. So it's bathrooms for kindergarten as well as additional bathrooms for the school.
This design, the previous one, you wouldn't have to change any of the day-to-day of the school. I imagine you could still use the spaces.
You could. It gives you opportunities to rethink how you're using them, and certainly having a cafeteria in addition to a gym would significantly change how you can program your building.
I'm sorry.
Oh, I'm sorry. Yes, we'll talk about that. Yes. That's a great question. So let me just let you know, the bottom floor here, same thing, internal renovations, some relocation of classrooms like music and art into bigger spaces, et cetera. So yeah, the question about, I guess, logistics and disruption, how would we stage that all? We don't have all the answers for that yet. I think it's fair to say, and this is where Walter will start to jump in, navigating the logistics of B are going to be easier than navigating the logistics of C when it comes to construction. I think that's very, very true. And with any of the construction, anything that is external could be built during the school year. Anything that's internal, we would have to reserve to summers. So going back to B, we could build, and same thing happened at Prospect. We had a smaller addition, but that they were able to work on do the construction of that during the school year. Then when it came time to tie it into the main building, they did that on breaks, summers, off, times when students were not in session. And there's safety and security protocols that we would put in place around any construction space when there's, if it's near students at any point in time. So same thing, likely we would build the extension first and then potentially move students into it while we worked on other parts of the building, but we would not have students in the building while renovation in that portion of the building was occurring. So C, it would be a tougher endeavor because you'd have to move a significant number of, you'd have to build, move, tear apart down, continue to do more building. So again, the construction manager that we just brought on is going to help us really more conceptualize what that would look like if this is a direction that the board continues to look at. So, yes. Okay. It needs to be on the mic. Yeah, and we are going to reserve time for questions later, but I know there's a lot of clarifying right now. Kathy, right there.
I was just wondering if you could make a slide where you have a layover, because I'm really having trouble envisioning I don't know, there was another slide with option C and the whole property. Could you put a layover of where is now?
Yes, and actually, if we were closer up, it would be easier to see that there is a little, we tried to do a little bit of that. There's some dotted lines. If you look here at the bottom of this blue, you can see a dotted outline of the current wing to give you a little sense of the scale in comparison. So like the corners of that new expansion are just outside of the end here and the end there.
But for the others, I don't know, I've looked at it online and I
Still
can't
see
figure it
it
out.
Okay, we can talk with Walter and see if there's a way to more highlight that footprint. So, okay. All right, we did look at one more C option. I'll mention it only briefly, and that is what if we move the gymnasium to the front of the extension? And the reason being that is a much lower elevation on the property. So if we want to try to minimize the profile of the gymnasium, can we put it in the lowest part of the property? That was the thinking behind there. Not a great option. I think it's much closer to the fence line and much closer to the front circle. So again, there was didn't seem to get a lot of traction on that thought, not as visually appealing. So it's there, but we're not looking to spend much time there. There's the estimated cost at this point in time for each of the options. B was the first one we looked at, and again, that's the net gain of 2 classrooms with a cafeteria, full renovation inside. B- was the same thing, minus a cafeteria. Option C was the bigger renovation that we looked at, the L shape, with the gymnasium in the back, and then C1 is with the gymnasium in the front. So again, C1 was kind of the most expensive. It wasn't most interest there anyway. So I think we're kind of not steering towards that. But just to give you a sense of scale of what the costs are. Quickly going on to the high school, because I know there's going to be a lot of questions we're going to want to come back to. High school, as I said earlier, we are having similar issues with enrollment capacity projections. Our classrooms are packed, they are overutilized, and we need more classrooms. Really, we need more classrooms now, but knowing that we're going to grow almost 100 students at the high school in the coming years, it's really important that we think about how do we expand. We did expand 5 or 6 classrooms in the last bond project, but it was kind of the tip of the iceberg. So it's a chance to think about, is there a way to expand more? Specifically within that, we have an insufficient number of science labs, and the labs are outdated at this point. They were original to the middle school construction, which is going on almost 30 years at this point. So that results in a loss of prep time, loss of instructional time, as I said, and not really built for the learning, the instructional approaches that one uses with next generation standards. And any of you who have high school students, you know we do not have enough cafeteria space for our high school students. Even with open campus, students still struggle to have space to eat. So we've started to think about an extension that would go between the middle school and high school on the Ingalls Field side. We currently call it the breezeway. It's where you can walk under the covered walkway. We could put an extension that would connect those 2 buildings. On the ground floor could be a student center, commons, something, I think of it like a college student center. That's in my mental model. That's what I'm thinking of. An open space, kids can go, they can get something to eat, they can hang out with friends, they can do work. A teacher could bring a class down, they could have a collaborative work group. A lot of different things they could do. You could do events there, you could do community events. So a big open space, but that could also serve in essence as a cafeteria, or as we keep saying, something more serious than a library, but less serious. No, less serious than a library, more serious than a cafeteria. A place for students to engage and be together, which is really critically important, again, on the belonging and wellness front. We also then, above that, would be in this model, which is option B, we would add a total of 6 science labs and 2 general purpose classrooms over the 2 levels. So above that would be, I think that's 4 labs and 2 in a classroom that level. And if you go up another level, it would be another couple science labs in another classroom. That's, I think, the smallest version we're looking at. We went all the way from 6 labs and 2 general purpose classrooms all the way up to 12 labs and everything in between. So again, we're kind of looking at getting a sense of what people value, what's most important. Our ideal would be somewhere around 10. If we could do that, we could get all of the high school science classes in the same wing, which would really centralize that department, which would be the ideal. Also within that, we did consider, if you see the purple area there on the right of that first floor or that level, we did talk about at a certain point, could we renovate some of those older classrooms then back to create office space for district offices to get us out of rental space and back on campus? That conversation, we all have kind of come to the agreement that students need the space more than we do. So we'd rather leave that as classroom space, maybe do some renovations there so we get really more net gain of classrooms. We did also, I'll go back to this one, that little purple square, purple rectangle in the corner on the left. We could potentially take that technology room and renovate it into partial offices for the district office, we could then rebuild that room in part of the new extension or the renovated classrooms. So that could give us a partial solution, which is much more affordable and maintains classrooms for kids. That was option B. Option C is a little bit bigger expansion, but same concepts. Student center on the bottom level with collaborative spaces for all different kinds of activities for our students, especially for a place to eat and to congregate. And then again, the bigger expansion above it with potentially up 10 science labs. That would actually give us a net gain of 13 classrooms because we currently have 3 science classrooms that are in regular classrooms. They would move to the new wing, open up 3 regular classrooms. And we have 1 teacher who's on a cart as well, so they would also give them a home. Estimated cost of those 2 options, as we see there, is $34.5 to $44 million. And again, we're looking at ranges that are really kind of everywhere around that to decide what's the right size fit for the program, but also what's the right size fit for the budget of the bond. If we were to add that partial movement of district offices to the middle school, that would add just over $1 million to the cost of the project. So finally, I mentioned earlier upgrades to heat and heating systems. If we upgrade to hot water, that positions us very well to then consider upgrading to air conditioning in the 4 schools that do not have it, because that system will pair well. If we upgrade to air conditioning, that then makes geothermal worth looking at because you have to have both heating and air conditioning to make that, to consider that system. It is a higher upfront cost, but has longer, a lot of payback on the long term from the energy saving perspective. And there are currently some, and Walter can talk more knowledgeably about this than me, rebates, tax credits, grants, et cetera, that could help to offset the bulk of those first costs. If we were to air condition the elementary schools, the 3 of them, what would just be over $14 million. The high school itself would be $15.5 million. And geothermal, in addition, these are all additive, would be another $12 million. But again, we estimate about $9.5 million of that could be offset by grants and other funding sources. We would need to get approval for the whole amount because you're not guaranteed those until you go through the process. But those are things that are being considered. Another point that's important to know, a lot of the middle school and a lot of the high school is air conditioned. It's kind of been like in bits and pieces over the years for different reasons. So and with all the older schools, we are in the process of upgrading electrical and we will be putting Windows units in starting this spring, so that by the fall, when the governor's new legislation goes into effect, we can't hold instruction in classrooms that are 88 degrees or higher, and the 3rd floors of our buildings, unfortunately, do get there. So we're going to have this building, Colonial, Prospect, and the high school, any room that's not currently air conditioned. On the top floor, we'll have those as of September, hopefully sooner. but it's not a long-term solution and not an energy-efficient solution. So going to the funding that I talked about earlier very quickly, and we're almost done. We'll get back to questions. So we have a couple debt drops. The blue there is where we currently are in the 26-27 school year. We have a drop in debt service, debt payments that would enable us to borrow up to $10 million for renovations without adding to the tax burden. So it would be tax neutral. There would not be an impact to the taxpayer. And then when we get to the 2030-31 year, we have another drop. That's where the middle school is paid off. That would enable us to borrow up to $55 million more tax neutral. So we can borrow up to 65 tax neutral without adding to the tax burden. That won't cover everything that we've seen here, but that certainly would go a long way to mitigate those costs. So obviously, as we work with through the projects, work with our architect and our construction manager, we'll look for ways to maximize building aid and explore anything that could help to offset potential geothermal investments. So a couple more sessions coming up. As you can see, tonight is the third one this week. So we're happy to have you all here. We've added a couple more after, and there will likely be more to come as well. Those are walkthroughs there if you want to come back and see anything. So with that, we've reached the end, and I'm going to open it up to questions. And we will ask, for the sake of tonight, we are being live streamed and recorded, so just so we can capture that, if you do have a question you want to come up, I'll move this a little closer so it's not so scary. We'd welcome you to come up, ask your question. We'll do our best to field the question. If we can't answer it tonight, then we'll do our best to get that to you in the future. Adam.
Good to see you again.
Likewise.
Thanks for coming to Siwanoy and throwing this. Real big commute for me next door. Couple of things. One, I've been attending these meetings now for about a couple weeks.
Yep.
So a couple of things that you said. The Siwanoy enrollment, your expectations are too high. I know that because you're already 12 too high this year. And so this year we're at 274, 273, 276. You have 285 in the projections, so we're already below.
And those are based on the reports, which are
right,
estimates.
but those are based on what the projections were that you were given.
Right.
We're not getting a 307, so that's too high, but that's fine. That's fine. And Colonial has less square footage per student based on the numbers he put in his slides in September. But again, that's fine too. What I'm concerned about is Siwanoy uses its property. I understand the uses of the indoors. But outdoors, we have kindergarten popsicles in August, back-to-school picnic in September, pasta night in October, movie night in March, Culture Fest in May, Spring Fling in June, and it's wall-to-wall. And if you were to build C, we would have less square footage per student of outdoor space than Colonial has now with the house. So you would be taking, 10,000 square feet, 15,000 square feet, whatever the number is, and you would be absolutely demolishing our outdoor life as a community. And I think that that's a problem. The other thing I wanted to say is I appreciate that you have started to listen to the community. We've taken the parking lot off the radar, which is great. And nobody has yet or wants to say that ADA is not appropriate. What we are saying as a community, and I think people have misinterpreted some of what our neighbors have been saying, is ADA is not a permission slip to do whatever you want. It's a permission slip for you to do some construction. So what I would urge, and this is my personal opinion based on nobody else, and Walter's heard me speak a few times, option B minus, as you call it. I propose option B2. 4 classrooms, that's it, not 6. And the reason for that is it allows you to maintain where this playground is. It allows you to maintain the entire upper area. It minimizes the amount of outdoor space that you take. This site is space constrained. And I love the idea of putting all of special ed in one room, in one building. But this site is not the right site for it. That's the problem. And I have a student who has special needs, 2 of them, and I understand all the things that go with it. But there's another property that you own that's an elementary school that has more than enough space to build 4 classrooms for whatever special ed needs might be needed for the district. This site is not the site. So I would urge you to consider B double minus. Thank you.
Thank you. All right. Mic is open for any other questions or thoughts. And he said your feedback is really important too as we plan for the next round of coming back.
Hi, Hi, I just wanted to piggyback to what Adam was saying and just add that, we're talking about the well-being of students and how, building a cafeteria or having more space is helpful for them. But it's proven time and time again that exploring outdoor space and playing is such a huge part of education, particularly for students who are in special ed. So taking away play space is actually not going to benefit these students. And then I also had a question, which was the construction time difference between, say, Plan B minus and Plan C or alternate C.
Walter, would you be able to speak to that a little bit more? Turn to the technical. And again, this is estimates at this point, but timeline for construction of B versus.
Yeah, I wish we had a really clear answer on that right now, but for sure, any addition is going to take, in a minimum, probably 16 to 18 months to construct. And then there's the exercise of musical chairs. And I think conceptually, option C, we all recognize, is probably a little bit more challenging to do, but probably happens in a similar phase in that we build a portion of it as a new construction, occupy that area, and then, remove portions of the building. So there's a little bit more musical chairs associated with it, and it probably extends the construction by at least 50%. I think that's fair to say. We are going to work on, what schedule timelines could look like for options B and C. We've heard that question a few times, and it's an important consideration, right? Like, how difficult is this thing to do, and what's the net gain? So we're going to work on that.
Hi. Many of you know me. I'm Amy Platt. I'm president-elect for PTA next year. I'm fully in support of option B, just to put that out there for everyone. I have kiddos that aren't even in this school yet, that are several years out, and we will be here in the height of construction with 2 out of my 3 children, and I still think it's a great option. For the extent of what geothermal would give us, what would the cost analysis be of what our typical heating, cooling bill is now versus what it would be if we did geothermal? Do we have those kind of estimate saving numbers?
Yeah. I'm going to turn to Walter on that one too.
I'm going to have to get my own microphone. Good question. So that's a complicated analysis. There's some, rule of thumb things we can do. You can look online. You can find just, it's like going to WebMD. You can find whatever you want there. What we did do is look at some studies from NYSERDA. There's one, so NYSERDA administers a lot of geothermal monies across the state. They're interested in investing in clean technologies. They also fund grant studies to look at this. So we did find a study online for the Children's Village in Dobbs Ferry. They considered installing geothermal throughout the whole campus. It's a complicated analysis. So, but basically, the study showed that over the course of 25 years, so that's the expected useful life of the heating system components, not necessarily the geothermal wells, it was about 10% more when you consider utility offsets and the capital investment for the geothermal to do geothermal. That was not including any incentive money. So I think we heard before, there's some money that's currently available from the federal government in the form of a tax rebate. It's tax law. So it's not something that we can plan on in the beginning of the project to say this is secured grant money for geothermal, but could be available as a tax credit. The school would actually have to file a tax form to seek this money, that's how it's set up now. It's a direct pay. With including that tax incentive, it's about 18% less, according to this NYSERDA study, to run the geothermal system for the first 25 years. So the net cost is about 18% less. The real benefit of that system comes in the next 25-year life cycle, where you don't have the capital investment for the geothermal wells, but you get all the net benefit. So I think when you think about geothermal for an institutional approach, you really want to take a long view on the horizon. This is something that will pay long-term dividends for the community. And frankly, the large installations that we've done with geothermal are for institutions that are looking at 50, 100-year horizons. So.
I'm curious about the bonds. Mm-hmm. So you're trying to keep the debt service level for the period of time that, from right now through the next, if we were to vote on something. if we weren't to do a major project, what would the difference be, and what would the savings be to the community tax-wise?
I might tap my good friend Jim back there. Jim Rickey is our assistant superintendent.
I might have a follow-up.
Yeah. Okay, no, that's fine. That's fine. Might as well stay up here. I don't, yes.
Hi, good evening. So as we looked at the debt service, the immediate debt service that's dropping off is about a $600,000 amount every year. And the second tier is about $2.6 million per year. So as you look at that, our tax warrant is 1% is about $720,000 a year. So as you look at it, that's kind of what the impact would look like over that time period. So the first $10 million, it's about a little bit less than a 1% reduction. And then when you look at the other part, it's $2.7 million. So there's a much larger reduction there at that point.
You might want to stay close. I think she's got a follow-up.
I have a follow-up. I'm just curious, when you do decide to put this out for bonding and the bond referendum, I remember years ago, we did the middle school, and I think we were doing the turf field at the same point in time. I don't know if that, my memories might be a little conflated. But anyway, I remember them being grouped together, and it didn't go over very well, and the community voted it down, and it came back with a new bond, and it split the projects out. Yes. And the field was voted down. Would this be grouped into one, or would we have separate options?
Yeah, so that's before either of our time, but we have heard the history. That hasn't been decided yet, the answer to your question. That's certainly something that the board is considering, because even when we think back to 2018, we did split separate propositions up then as well. And the way that one was structured is, and it was actually fields of all things. And the field proposition, even if it passed, if the facilities proposition didn't pass, then you couldn't, then even if B passed, it would not be approved. One was contingent upon the other. So the board hasn't gotten that far in the decision making, but that's certainly an option from how to set up the bond. And that's part of what this feedback honestly gives us some insight into, is where people's values and priorities are.
Hi, I'm not sure if this is the appropriate place, but has there been any consideration in buying the multifamily home when you're looking at the property to the left,
Yep, I know exactly what you're
to make
talking
more
about.
space?
We're aware, yes. Yeah.
Wait, but so does that mean no consideration, or?
No, we're aware that there is a house there, and
Okay.
when one is buying property, one doesn't really talk much about it. Just put that. And I'm not saying that something's actually happening one way, but yes, that idea has come forward, and we're considering all options that come forward. Put it that way. It's not for sale.
In option C, why did they take down the other side wing, like where the library is? I might have missed that in a previous discussion.
No, that didn't come up. It's a good
or was
question.
that to create more green space, or?
Yeah, I think it was aesthetic. It was definitely to create more to make up for the loss in green space, but also I think to provide just some aesthetic symmetry to the building as well. That was the one. Yeah, it's a good point, and it's hard to see on the graphic, but the kind of light green around the darker green blob, that's a new green space that's opened up by the removal of the wing. So you do lose for sure on one side, but the attempt was to gain on the other side. Yes.
I know it's a little early for this question, but could you talk a little bit about the construction process in the sense of, is it just the summer? Like, you can barely drive down the street with cars. Like, how would a fire engine ever get here if there's like construction trucks here?
Yeah.
And
we don't have
I mean, I know some people at Hutch, and Hutch had 2 streets where there's no houses. There's no place here where you're not.
More challenging for sure. We don't have those details yet, but what we do is we work with the villages on exactly those kinds of things. What are the hours that we can do it? What are the street directions? directions? Where are we going to stage equipment? Where is, we coordinate with them, with local law enforcement, and we did our best, and we're already planning to do that again if this moves forward. Making sure that we're doing a hard mailing letter to all the neighbors, direct neighbors, to keep folks abreast of what's going on, to hear what the concerns are, to give people a place to call and someone to contact when there's a problem. So we try our best to plan in a way that will make sense, as much sense as possible for the building, and minimize as much of the inconvenience as we can, understanding it's never going to be completely eliminated.
Right, but the school does not have to actually go by any of the village's sort of noise things, or their
Right.
laws. You don't have
Right.
to
We're
obey,
exempt
and you
from a
don't
lot of the regulations.
necessarily. You know what I mean?
No, but just
you blow when it's illegal everywhere else, and you.
Yeah, just because
when
we don't
you've
have
done
to.
other projects.
We try to be good neighbors. I guess that's what I would say. Walter, I don't know if there's anything else you can add to that from your experience.
Yeah, I would just point back to the Hutch project. Frank Arturi was the person from the construction manager's firm, and I think he had to get a new cell phone because he had given his number out to everybody in the neighborhood, and he made friends with everybody. It was on the sign, right? And so, I think that's part of the process, right? Is communication, coming up with a plan that works for everybody. I know that in the neighborhood, this is super important and it feels like a really small site, but in the greater context of construction, there's actually some space here. We worked on projects that are much tighter, and certainly worked on zero lot line projects in New York City, where you have to figure out a whole different type of logistics pattern where materials aren't kept here and they're brought in, brought right to the building and put in place. So it's definitely something that needs to be worked out. There's certainly commands a fair amount of thought to come up with a plan that's viable there, but it's certainly doable. Sure. Yeah. So the question was, can I talk a little bit about just the design
I
process?
just wanted to add on to that. Wouldn't there be a community noise monitoring program and a community air monitoring program with that?
Yeah, so.
That's a requirement, isn't it?
And yeah, so all of the required protocols for construction will happen. I think to Dr. Champ's point, there is an alignment process with kind of the neighborhood expectations. There's a plan that we're going to come up with that's compatible with that. We're certainly not going to look to be disruptive. We're not going to look to do something that's unneighborly and, for instance, work through the night or something crazy. At Hutch, the ordinances were all followed, and that was part of the game plan from the beginning. So Dr. Champ asked me about the design process. Can I talk about that a little bit? And we've talked about that, I think, to the Board of Education, but I don't know if it'll surprise anybody in this room, but sometimes in New York State, the way things have to happen, it's not totally intuitive. And with construction projects where New York State is chipping in and funding these things, providing building aid, there are pretty strict guidelines about what you can do before a project is authorized and what you can't do. And one of the things that the state really won't let us do is detailed design. So SED is telling the school district, you can't spend a bunch of money to develop a project that may not happen, right? We're not going to fund that. We're not going to pay you for that. So basically what happens is we take a project to about 1% design, 2% design maybe, before it goes to a referendum. And that's a function of protecting public money, right? We just don't want to spend a ton of money on something that may not happen. So when we're talking about projects for referendum, this is really about a scope and a budget. It's not a detailed design. We know this building will command a lot of detailed architectural design, no matter what happens here. If it's B, C, A, whatever the option is, there is going to be a very serious design process that happens with a lot of decisions and a lot of stakeholder input. So everybody in this room, the school district, the neighborhood, we're going to make sure this building works the way it should from an operational perspective, but also from an architectural perspective. It needs to look a certain way in this neighborhood. We recognize that. That all happens after a project concept and scope and budget are approved by referendum. So we hear everything that's being said. There's a kind of a procedural order that needs to happen with some of the decisions.
Hi, I have a question. Dovetailing off of two comments that were just made. You mentioned that materials, this is maybe a more usable space for a construction site because materials can be housed here. With that being said, given any option, what the experience for our children who will be attending school here during the construction, where, if you are storing construction trucks, materials on the playground, where are they going for those 3 years to play? Where's that happening?
Yeah, so I didn't mean to imply that the whole site is going to be taken up with
Not the whole-
materials.
yeah, but-
I think some portion of the site would need to be secured with a barrier between places that are student occupied and places that are construction zones. And obviously, we would want to get that barrier as close as possible to that building footprint. And I guess what I'm referencing is not that the expectation is we're going to come store all the building materials on the site and take over the whole site, but that even within that blue footprint area, there are pockets where things can be put down in a staging zone. And I'm talking about, for instance, if footings are being poured, contractors need a place to take rebar off a truck before it gets put in place where the concrete's going to go. So that type of activity can happen on your site without taking over the whole site.
Right, and is it fair to say that even option B, B minus, B minus, minus, that it is the most ambitious school project while the students would still be in the building? I mean, like B minus, the kids will still be in the building attending school while all that construction's going on.
Mm-hmm.
You just mentioned you're not going to be working in the middle of the night,
Yeah.
which means all the work's going to be happening during the day. What is the plan for kids learning while there's construction going on?
Yeah.
That's not maybe for you, I don't
Yeah,
know.
no, it's a good question. It's a fair question. I think the experience would be similar to Prospect Hill, how that happened. It's not unusual in terms of school operations
Right.
in terms of school construction, I'm sorry, in our world for that to happen. And the place if we look at could we just flip to option B for a second? If we actually look at where option B is relative to instructional space, it's actually pretty far away from windows and.
Yeah, but all the internal renovations,
That would have to happen in the summer.
those have to happen in the summer.
It would have to happen when the students aren't there.
Everything in yellow has to happen when the students aren't there.
Yeah,
Okay, because I thought
Yeah.
there was a point where we were talking about, we build the wing, we move the kids
that
into
would
the.
be option C.
That's for C. You
Yeah.
build the wing, you move the kids into the wing, and then.
Yeah, because in option C, we clearly can't take down 40% of the building and then
Right.
build an addition, right? It's already tight here. So that would be a little bit more of a musical chairs. In this option, the addition would just be built, be partitioned off with fences, enclosed, secured. The blue part would be built, and the yellow part would remain as is during the school year, and then in the summer is renovated.
Right, I'm selfishly trying to understand the impact on my
Yeah,
child. And so if I'm understanding this correctly, option B allows my child to stay in this building, to come to this building every day, to have as normal of a school day as he's going to have. He will be impacted by construction noise on a day-to-day basis, which maybe is just unavoidable, and possibly by marked off areas of the playground where it is unsafe, but they'll be able.
It would be fenced, hard fence.
Right,
Yeah.
right, but a diminished play area during the 2 to 3 years of construction. And, okay, I'm just trying to get a better idea of what the day-to-day experience for these kids will be like.
It's an insightful question. So when we plan phasing, we call it phasing and logistics, that's our term for it. We think about the amount of moves students need to make during that project. I can tell you we're doing right now in the process of a 70,000 square foot addition to 150,000 square foot middle school. And that project includes complete renovation of that middle school. And the whole logistics plan, which was developed during the design period, was focused around minimizing the changes to the student schedule. Because we recognize that every time that musical chairs needs to happen, it's disruptive, not like on a daily basis, but on like a semester basis, because kids have to reacclimate. It's like first day of school all over again. So whatever plan we come up with is going to be sensitive to that approach. And I think you're absolutely right. C is going to have more of those changes than B would.
Okay, thank you.
And I would just add one more piece to that too. As we did with Prospect Hill, as we did with Hutchinson, we would work with the building principal to coordinate that, because there's often space that is not currently being used for outdoor activity that could be put into service during that time period. So while there's a loss somewhere, there could be a gain somewhere else. So those are conversations that we would have down the road about that. And as far as the noise level, that is also something that the principals work with the construction manager. There's going to be certain blackout dates. There's going to be certain blackout times where certain noise levels are just not going to be allowed. It might be a state testing period. It could be some event going on in the school. And that's where the on-site construction manager works directly with the principal to coordinate to minimize those disruptions to the greatest degree possible. Just add that piece.
So this is just a comment from both being located right across the street in my home and having a current first grader at Siwanoy. I think C is just going to be way too disruptive, both from being right in the middle of a very residential street. I'm already dealing with people parking in front of my driveway on a regular basis, having to wait to get out. For the kids, I can't imagine the disruption that C would bring. So I think B is a really reasonable option. I really like B. My question about B is my kids don't eat the school lunch because it's cold. I know it's prepared elsewhere and brought in, and that they don't have enough time to eat lunch. Would adding a cafeteria address either of those problems?
I want to say yes, because when we talked about with the cafeteria is building it big enough for 3 grade levels. Right now, we can only fit 2 grade levels worth of students in. So they pack in, they get their little lunch, they eat it, and then they run out. But having a bigger cafeteria, we're going to be able to hold more students, but it's also going to provide more food service space. So there should be a better flow to the space. The food service is a different issue. So that's something that we go out to, we renew our contracts with them about every 5 years. And as we bring more schools online that have better cafeteria space, that's going to also enable us to relook at our food service. We currently are not cooking, we're still cooking all the food out of the high school. In this design, Walter, correct me if I'm wrong, this was designed to be still more of a pantry as opposed to a full prep kitchen, right? So, but I think it would certainly have more updated and upgraded food equipment to maintain temperature, to do a better job of keeping the food where it should be. But definitely the more space will give us more flexibility.
Hi, I just wanted to commend you that after 115 years, you're looking at this building. So I just want to start with that as a kind of a baseline statement. And with that, as I looked at the plans, obviously we don't have children in the school anymore, but this building is really important and the structure is really important. So I liked B simply because it keeps the aesthetic look and feel of the building. I would also just wish, and I have nothing against the middle school or the high school, but as you're thinking about this, prioritizing this building, as we prioritized Hutchinson School, as we prioritized Colonial in the past, let's prioritize Siwanoy. Thank you.
Thank you, John.
Hi. Thank you for prioritizing Siwanoy. Thank you for these thoughtful plans. I do have real concerns with C, and I think that there's so many concerns I could list, but I think B is a very viable option that addresses the problems that we see in the school. I have a child who's in 4th grade and a child who went through the school from kindergarten, who both have had amazing experiences in the school. The playground, the play space, the outdoor space, I think is critical to their love of the school, to their experience both during school, after school, on the weekends. Changing the beautiful aesthetic of Siwanoy, it's like the heart of our community. I just think it's really, B is just the obvious option, from disruption to cost to just the heart of our community. So I'd really urge you to lean more in the direction of B.
Great. Thank you.
So I understand you can't give a detailed design plan, but you'd previously said that whatever add-ons you do make are going to blend in with Siwanoy. So as was kind of previously mentioned, obviously the outside of the school is super important. So does blend mean you're going to make it look like this school, or the middle school compared to the high school is fairly ugly? So is that going to be what this blend means, or is blend actually going to be like the school?
Well, the specifics are a little too early to tell, but I think that the thought right now is we're really going to do something that essentially matches what you have here. I think that's the approach. You know, and I think when you have the two different options, and B, I think the obvious solution would be, let's make something that looks exactly like this building, has same proportions. It feels like it's just another addition, right? The two angled wings were additions to mimic the middle, and I think we just continue that approach. Option C would most likely have the similar approach as well, but might have something in the middle that's a little different, but to be determined.
Yeah, and I would say that probably one of the best comparisons that I think of is the Prospect Hill. I mean, that was definitely a planned, matched approach as compared to other projects that have been done in the district. Yes, sir.
Hi, thanks. Sorry, came in late. I also think that C would be horrendous because it tears down any part of this building, which is so important to the entire very small neighborhood that is Siwanoy. But my question is, and it's a plea to really anyone, I think that the bond numbers are just eye-popping. And no offense, but I think the price for all this is rather eye-popping. Yet I don't pretend to understand exactly. I think it was Jim who spoke. I wonder if anyone can possibly put this into terms that we can understand. And that would be, I'm envisioning, I don't have the acumen to do this, the financial acumen, but I'm asking anyone who does, some sort of table that says, if your house is taxed at $10,000 in the year 2025, do a 10-year projection out without any of this work, and then do it with, and you can figure out whatever grade of bond you want, but 10,000. Then for the house that's at 20,000, for the house that's at 30,000, 40,000, and just put it out in terms where those of us who are going to have to pay for this, and those of us who look at this as our home for not the short term, but for the long term, what are we signing on to? I would just really like to see that.
Yeah, that is an absolutely fair question, and we plan to do that. I'm going to let Jim talk too. Once we get a little farther down the process and have a more defined scope, we're going to be able to do that because we're going to know a little bit better what we're dealing with. But one of the things we did last time is, and I think it would speak to what you're asking for, we were actually able to put a tax calculator right on the website where you can look up your assessed value for your home, type it right in, and it'll tell you exactly what to expect as far as a tax impact. So I'm going to let Jim see if there's anything to add to that.
Just a couple of different things. As the plan becomes more refined, we work with a financial advisor that really specializes in school construction and school bonding and working with the state, because we also receive a certain amount of state aid, and that was something I wanted to just bring up, because I shared with you kind of what our debt service drop-off is going to be over the next 2 to 5 years. That's the gross number. Our net number is less than that because we do receive state aid. So for, say, a renovation project and infrastructure projects, we go out and we borrow for 15 years. For addition projects, we can go and bond for 20 years. And if we look back to when we did the Hutchinson project, which was brand new, we went out for 30 years. And all of those things come into play. We've got our debt service tables in our budget book again, and these are part of that modeling that we do when we work with our financial advisor. When we build new space, we work with something called, I think it's a maximum cost allowance, Walter. So that's something that that number is assigned to each building, and it's fairly technical. The good news is the person we work with really has a great handle on it, and they helped us with that modeling and with the last bond, and we really, I think we were able to over-provide based on what they, the financial modeling that they did for us. And we really keep up on what's happening in the marketplace now, and we try to give conservative estimates when we try to do this modeling, so that, again, people don't forget. And we know that people remember these meetings and they remember the numbers, and if they don't match up, if they're higher, people are going to remind us of that. So we want to be, we're aware of that, and we want to give you real numbers as realistic as we can as we move into that phase.
Hi there. Thank you so much for all the work you've done and for the opportunities to contribute a little bit. I also lean towards B for what it's worth, but I did have a question, actually, as we're talking about different iterations of B. And I'm thinking about the different ways that education evolves. I mean, you've mentioned it a few times. These classrooms were built for a certain understanding of what school is. I'm trying to think about, I wouldn't want to have to do this twice in the next, couple decades. What do you see as sort of the future of education, and how can we ensure that we're sort of future-proofing in what we're doing? If we go with a minimum projection, like a minimum construction project, are we then saying, one generation down is then going to foot the bill for the next iteration of this, which I don't think would be the best thing to do. So that's a question on sort of education future. And then I also was curious, I'm thinking about the Hutchinson renovation, and I can only imagine, and I don't know this as a fact, so correct me if I'm wrong, that in all likelihood, when you have a renovated brand new school, property values also go up. So yes, we're paying a little bit, but in a sense, it may also be an investment, because then it's a more desirable place to be, because you have a better, school that's there. We have a new wing, bigger classrooms. I know, last thing I'll say is I went into one of the other schools. It was Prospect for some gathering, and it was about, the educational models. And I walked in, my two girls go to school here. I walked into one of those buildings, one of those classrooms, and I was like, is this just one? Is there like...
And there's an elevator?
Yeah, it was amazing. And I can, as a prospective family coming, as they're walking through different schools, I mean, the choice would be clear to me, circumstances, and I ended up here, but I think that also has an effect on property values. So I'm wondering if somehow that can be taken into the equation.
Okay, a lot of questions there. Yeah, it is. In the future of education, I think that's a tough one. I think, and I'm not an expert on any of these things. I mean, I do think, and I know that there's some, real estate agents around that can probably give you the better answer about how the new Hutchinson has impacted home values. My sense is that it's done just that. Once we got through construction, there's definitely movement over there, and I think I would gander that home prices have gone up, and I would hope the same here. What I would say is the heart and soul of our schools is always going to be our teachers. And that's why, like we said, when we went around, you're never going to hear us complaining about it. We're going to deliver an education that our students are going to really are going to benefit from, and hopefully our families fall in love with, regardless of the facility. The future of education, I don't really know. Things kind of change on a daily basis lately. But I think giving flexibility, if I could say one thing, I would say flexibility is probably one of the most important things for us, because we don't know what the next 10 or 20 years of education are going to look like. But if we have flexibility in our facilities, then we can adapt to whatever that might be. It's the unknown. I mean, you could go anything from even more personalized education to, I think there was a whole open education movement where they would put multiple classes in one big space, and they would do co-teaching. You don't really know where it's going to flow, but I think flexibility gives you the most options long term. My sense, and again, real estate agents would answer this one better, is there is a somewhat stabilizing enrollment factor here, because we don't have a lot of space. So especially in the manor, there's not a lot of development. The homes that we have are the homes that we have, with a couple coming up here and there, but there's like more generational turnover that results from older couples maybe, or single folks selling their house to a family or a soon-to-be family. So I think that's always going to be the generational cycle turnover here. So my thought for this building is a little bit more flexibility on space would prepare us well for at least the foreseeable future. I think for the time that any of your children might come and go through these schools. Would be my best answer. Sorry if I missed any other questions in there. Okay.
Hi, my name is Maura Curtin, and my daughter was in kindergarten in 2017 when the Hutchinson bond came up for a conversation. So it's a huge project. It's a big change. It's a change in the neighborhood. It's a change to the school. It's a change to your children's schedule. It's a change to your children's routine. My daughter, as I just said, was in kindergarten. Her school basically became a construction site. She remained in school, but much to this young woman's experience here at Simonoy, if you were to speak to my daughter now, who's in 7th grade, she watched a school be built. They learned about, the boys watched the trucks out the window. I feel like the district did everything in its power to help us. We had no playground. We walked the school district. The kids had to walk to Julianne's playground, which, if you're not familiar with Hutchinson, is probably 2 blocks away. So definitely an inconvenience, but I feel that, and the neighbors were extremely concerned about the whole project, which everyone was really taking into consideration. But I think it might be a good idea to maybe have some of the Hutchinson students that were at the school at the time of the construction talk to some of you to just allay some concerns about your children's day-to-day experience during a construction project like this. And I would just say, I think dream big in a way. I'm not advocating for one over another, and certainly the community, and especially the community here, should be the ones that really have the most input. But I would say, like, do a full-size kitchen. Please, and then we can make our own food, like, just dream. That's what I just would say. Like, when I'm looking at this, this beautiful stage and theater, and I'm looking and I'm thinking, can you put on a show if it's really just storage for the cafeteria? So if anybody has any questions, I'm happy to talk about the experience. I totally understand. I totally understand.
Okay, let's. Yeah.
Thank you for letting me share my experience.
Hello. Sorry. It's very close to the mic. So I'm looking at this, and I'm not a map maker, but like it's a fairly large footprint, obviously even on draft B, compared to the current wings. So I guess my question is there a version of this that is like the minimal amount of space that needs to be constructed in order to have another multi-purpose space, which I'm not opposed to, but not gaining, like, if we're not really going to increase by that many students, having a couple larger classrooms without net additions seems to be more reasonable than just trying to build more and more and more outside of like what's already the current footprint. Like what are we gaining in terms of square footage on draft B?
I don't know, Walter, do you have dimensions to share that?
Yeah, just off the top of my head, I think the B addition, I think it's in the range of 12 to 14,000 total square feet, so half of that per floor.
And then, like, is there another like way to think about the construction to be a little more clever with the space being multi-use? I don't know if it's like electronic partitions on walls or things like that could shift, because I've seen that before too in like gyms and other spaces.
Yeah. We are looking at trying to make the addition more compact and efficient. I think the superintendent mentioned one of the concepts that's come forward is to try to build out the second floor with a little more density over the cafeteria. So one of the things we're doing is trying to tighten up that footprint as much as we can. But there is some competing interest there with requests for some of the other spaces like full-size kitchen or even toilet rooms or some of the other features we mentioned. I think actually in the discussion with the Simonway faculty today, we heard pretty clearly that the closets are a big deal, and we don't show the closets right now. So we are working to massage that as best we can and make it as efficient as possible in terms of a layout.
Okay.
No Simonway question. Can you go to the HVAC portion? Well, specifically the costs of air conditioning. So you said that for the next school year, and I guess for a couple of years after that, there's going to be window units in many of the schools?
In the top floors of the unair-conditioned
top floors.
schools.
And do you know how much, okay, thank you. Do you know how much that's going to cost?
Those are the estimates there.
No, that's the central stuff. I'm saying how much is it going to cost?
Oh, for those units.
Yes.
I don't know off the top of my head. I know that.
I guess my point is that this seems like a lot of money to me on top of everything else that we're doing. And I don't know that it truly is more efficient. I mean, we know that yes, if you had to do an entire school, certainly a central AC would be more efficient. but it's much more targeted. And you're talking about putting central AC in multiple 100-year-old buildings. Do you know how long the useful life is of these new central AC units? Like, are we
I would have to
20 years, but we're
Probably
probably
20 years.
bonding for 30,
no, renovations we'd be bonding for 15 or 20 if it's an
15 or
expansion
20. All right,
generally.
that's a little better.
Yeah, I mean, the expected useful life, right? The components of the system all have different expected useful life. I think the pieces that make the cooling, like the fan components, could, depending on how we do it, condensers, talking about 20-year useful life. Those costs include a fair amount of infrastructure associated with that. So electrical service upgrades, ductwork, piping, those components would have a longer useful life. So it's a blended
But we can
analysis.
but we can meet because I do think that the schools are overheated right now, and we are supposed to meet this new law next year. So you're saying we're going to be able to do it with existing infrastructure, or at least what you're put in for next year, at a much lower cost.
Yeah, it's a much lower cost. And again, it's not fully engineered. It's not guaranteeing proper air circulation. But we are going to do what we can because we don't want to be in a position of having to close school over heat.
No, but you are going to be able to meet the law with a much less, with
Yes.
very targeted. I would encourage you to consider extending that without having to do all of these things. $30 million for central AC, that's probably going to be obsolete. And probably not, within 15 years. Thanks.
Okay, thank you. Okay, we are a little past time, so I'll just give a chance maybe for one more burning question of the evening. Monica.
Hi, my name is Monica. I am a Simon parent and just wanted to comment on two things. One, Julian is actually 2 blocks from Hutchinson. I just pulled the Google Maps so you can all see it's a 7-minute walk. And during that time, I lived actually by Julian's playground when they were starting the work. So I was walking that street with a 3-year-old then and 1-year-old in a carrier. So it's all a nuisance and it's inconvenience for sure, but it's doable. And this leads to my other comment that whatever option we pick, it always will come with some tough time for everyone, right? And adjustments, and we need to live for construction. But I think what would be important for us all to think in the future and also about the families that will come to the school. Or, for example, just to give you something to think about, the special ed classes. Imagine if your kids had to leave the school at 2nd grade and you would have to move to another school, and kids that already have so many needs, they would have to adjust again, adjust the building, the routine, because they have to change the school. And, I think we need to think about our neighbors and friends when you make a decision. So, no one will be there is no option that everyone will be happy about, but we just, I think, need to think what's the best for the majority of the people. Thank you.
Okay, and thank you. I think we'll end the evening there. Thank you all so much for being here, for your engagement. Please continue to stay engaged. Lots more to come. Have a wonderful night.